This is not a guide for any specific comp, but for the overall general fundamentals of Stronghold Protocol. We're going to go over the average game plan of how you should play every stage, but before that, we have to go over some system fundamentals, some pretty basic, some a little more complicated and advanced. Alright, first off, it should be obvious, but I want to put this into perspective. That is stack efficacy. If you look at this example, the 2 stack precision only gives plus 12% attack. Meanwhile, the 37 stack precision gives plus 54% attack. That is not insignificant. That is a massive jump for what feels like not that many stacks, to be honest. Think of that in terms of how when you sit on 0 Sargon stacks versus your normal case of hitting like over 100, probably 200 plus Sargon stacks. That is a massive, massive jump. That's why you should be very careful about splashing in alliances when you know you have 0 way to continue stacking them. We'll talk about this a decent amount as we talk about the general game plan. Next up is the operator strength framework. If you're familiar with any auto chess, TFT, super auto pets, this should come naturally to you. Just the fundamental understanding that a tier 3 unit is better than a tier 1 unit. And you can see that in the case of their attribute here. Basically the same traits, just one's Victoria, one's Yerag. But this one, the attribute is plus 2 stacks to your own alliance. And for Snow Hunter, it's plus 6 stacks. That's just a massive jump. So it goes without saying that the higher tier your shop, the greater value the units on your board. The higher tier units you have, the better your board should perform. But if you know Arknights, you know that's not always the case. For example, Quora feels a bit more like a 5 cost in terms of unit strength. This thing tanks infinite. Her attribute is decently good, but that's not even the reason, it's just her in-game combat strength. She sometimes tanks more than Hoshiguma, who if you put in as a custom operator would be like a tier 5 or tier 6 operator. So this is one of those operators where you think about how, okay, yes, it doesn't fit with my traits. Yes, it's just a tier 1 unit, but from the rules of Arknights and not the rules of auto chesses, this unit is an anomaly. And you have to think that way for any unit that is really good in the OG Arknights non-Stronghold Protocol. Really think about how good they are in IS, I guess, because it's not that uncommon to find these operators with your hope, you know? Moving on to what is a bit more of an advanced concept, and that's what I call prepping. I don't know if there's another name for it in the community, but this is just what I've been calling it. And that's based on playing around any unit that generates you funds. The most common way I use this is through Savage and Folnick, because if you sell them, you get a lot of funds, right? The next is Vigna and Minimalist. Because they're essentially free, you just hold them on your bench. The general point of this is timing. When you're trying to rush your level up or you're trying to do a massive roll down, you want to have these stacked up all at once. So that means holding the Vignas and the Minimalists on your bench. That means buying Folnicks and Savages on your normal roll downs in the early stages of the game, and then instead of selling them gradually just to buy units as you need them, you sell them all at once so that you have a massive stack of gold, allowing you to have a massive power spike. Of course, that means a lot of APM, and you have to be wary of the timer, but if you become experienced enough at Stronghold Protocol, that shouldn't be an issue. As we go on to the video, I'm going to talk about when you should level, but if you prep properly, you should be able to skip those timers entirely. For example, later in the video, I'm going to talk about how a standard time to level to 4 is from round 7 to 9. You could probably do it on round 5 or 6 if you prep properly. But yeah, advanced concept, this one's a little tough to do, and you shouldn't necessarily greet it because it's not every game that you're allowed to do it, but you should always look for this angle. Next up is scouting. Let me hide my camera real quick. The most important thing is that there are shared unit pools. What does that mean? That means you have to know what units you should not buy because you should not be fucking over your teammates. I do want to say that does not mean you should be bullied off your comp if you think you have the better spot. But besides that, let's talk about scouting in general. So scouting actually happens before the game even begins, and that's during the strategy phase. You can tell when somebody is posturing a specific alliance very easily just through any of the 6 here on the left. It's not that difficult to understand. If they pick Pepe, they're playing Sargon. Sargon should be off limits to you. Do not click it. Why are you contesting them for no reason? Does not make any sense. But the other one is a little bit more complicated and just kind of needs a bit more heads up planning, and that is posturing a play style. So throughout this video, I'm going to talk about general tempo. It's pretty static throughout the game in the sense of it's always like a diagonal line. On round 4, the enemy starts to get kind of strong, and then every round after that, they add more and more elite enemies. This playstyle thing is going to tell you how you should be playing the game. For example, Lee and Cannot tend to be weak in the early game, but have a massive burst of economy strength a little bit later into the mid game. What that means is you should probably play a little bit more aggressive in your early game to give room to the Lee and Cannot players, because those two players will have the economic strength and it will be their job to carry throughout the late game. A bit of a crossover is also picking Herald. From my experience, Yerag is incredibly strong during normal rounds, will carry every Unite phase, so that's Yerag's job, the Yerag player. But Yerag also falls off a cliff during the boss phase, so that'll be when it's your turn to pick up the slack. So that's one way. Another is Justin Jr., which is a bit of the opposite of Lee and Cannot. You have so much economic bursts of power because of the coins. By the way, this isn't a guide about individual strategies, but when you're playing Justin Jr., please do not combine your coins. The item becomes so disgustingly bad if you do. 2 to 12 is such terrible odds for you. Anyways, if they're playing normally, using their coins and not hitting the damn casino, then Justin Jr. will be able to simultaneously level fairly quickly while also having good board strength. They should be able to tempo a little harder because they have the extra funds to buy all the units that they need. So that's just something to think about in terms of, should I be strong right now? Well, what strategies did my teammates pick? And that should give you a general baseline. The next phase of scouting occurs in-game. Let's say everybody picks something generically for their strategies. Well, you would be then looking at their individual boards instead of just making an assumption. These aren't all of them, but these are generally the units that tell you, oh, they are committing this line. For example, Wanqing, why would you play that outside of Yan? Philae, why would you play that outside of Sargon? Heidi is a key role player. Praminix is a key role player. These are wildly important in stacking for Victoria and Yerag, respectively. So if you see that they have units like this, where it's clear that they have a really good spot for their comp, do not contest them for no reason. Please do not contest them for no reason. You're just inting your game because you need your teammates to be strong too alongside of you in order to beat these bosses. Again, caveat, that does not mean you get bullied off of your comp. If you think you have the better spot, like let's say one player has like 2 Rocks and that's it, and you have 2 Heidis, a Rock, and a Herald, you should be the one being the Victoria player. Alright, with those concepts done, let's talk about the general game plan. Starting off with the early game, that is from rounds 1 through 6, and we'll cover shop levels 1 through 3. Now, in your early game, you may feel inclined to completely sack, and you can do that depending on the strategy you pick. But in the most general sense, you should be a little bit stronger, be a little bit more aggressive with your rolls. The rounds are really easy from 1 through 3, so you can be a little weak then, but you have to be aware it takes a lot of time and money to build a strong board. So if you're consistently sacking, when the enemies actually become difficult on round 4, then it'll take multiple rounds to get to proper fighting strength. Like I said, be mindful of the tempo. I said earlier that I believe it becomes difficult on round 4, and then they keep adding more and more elite enemies as they go on. And of course, you should consider enemy types. Lapland should be on your radar if you're fighting against refraction units, for example. If you're fighting a lot of drone enemies and you're incentivized to pick up more precision units, stuff like that. You just kind of have to be a little bit flexible there. But past that, your early game is generally just Arknights fundamentals, and balancing that with generating stacks. You want proper healers, tanks, all that good stuff. Here I have a couple of pretty good openers. The Aid opener is really good. Aid is just a really good early game trait with some decent defense, but also it helps you generate stacks on your active alliances. That's just really good. This opener allows you to hold savages so that you can start preparing to prep. You shouldn't just sell off the savages. You should hold them as they come. Another really good opener is the Tin Man Pudding Texas Trifecta. It just perfectly complements the traits, activates Agile, activates Swift. Texas is a decent frontline with CC, and Tin Man deals decent damage and heals. It's kind of the whole package, and you can build anything around that. You should also very aggressively hold your pairs, because a leading up an operator in this game is really overpowered compared to like 2-starring a unit in TFT or something. In that if you elite an operator, you get the choice between 3 units in a tier above your shop. That is incredibly powerful. In the sense that, one, it's a high value unit, obviously, because it's a higher tier. The fact that you get a choice means you should be able to get use of that unit in like a normal case. And if you think you can't get use of all 3 of those units, you might be looking at the game a little too narrowly, but we'll talk about that a bit more later. That also means you shouldn't upgrade your units on level 1. It's extremely low value to get a choice between 3 tier 2 operators. Generally speaking, what's the damn point of that? Because of that, you should not be afraid to freeze. Freezing in this game is more similar to Super Auto Pets than it is to TFT, in that in TFT you lock your entire shop, including the empty slots because you already bought those units. In Super Auto Pets and in this game, they have it so only the units that are still there are frozen, but if you have any empty slots because you already bought those units, those will refresh with the new shop. So it's actually very high value just to freeze that, but don't freeze it all willy-nilly. Like, don't just freeze for an unvaluable pair, for example, because it still costs 1 fund to refresh your shop normally, like between rounds. So every round, that's 1 fund in value. So you're losing that value and you're just not efficient with your funds. In that same vein, like I said, do not tunnel on low value units. The pairs are the most important thing, especially in your early game, while simultaneously building as strong a board as you can in order to tempo out into your mid game. Consider just sacking the round, especially if your teammates look decently strong in their early game. It's really easy to justify sacking in the first 3 rounds especially, just because those battles are so easy. Here's a quick little quiz to see how much you grasp that. Here you have a Mei pair, 5 funds, it costs 3 to level to 2, and there's a Mei in shop. Go ahead and pause the video to see what you would do, what's the correct play here, but I will say the answer in 3, 2, 1. What I would personally do here is buy the Texas, that leaves us at 3 more funds, level up, leave the Mei in shop, and then freeze the shop. That's because if we buy the Mei now, we get extremely low value. Plus, it's nice to have the frontline against this round of enemies, as you can see here. They're all just melee heads. There's no reason to dig for tier 2 units by upgrading it now. It just doesn't make sense. Also, it's just an efficient use of gold. It's perfect math to go to true 0. That way, next turn, when you're shop level 2, you can then buy the Mei, have a stronger board, and dig for tier 3 units. If you think about the operator strength framework, will be better units with more value on average. So let's talk about the timers in the early game as to when you should level up. And to be honest, it's pretty flexible because you should be buying the pairs if they're presented to you. Like, it's okay not to level if you keep getting pairs handed to you in your shop, but that does not mean you should be spamming the reroll button, addicted to gambling, trying to dig in order to elite those operators. If you're not naturaling those pairs, if you're not naturaling those elite units, you should just level if you have the gold for it. It makes 0 sense to just sit there on a inefficient level with lower quality units. So I would say you would level to 2 as late as maybe round 4, and that's only if you keep getting pairs handed to you, if you keep getting valuable units, such as like a Lapland against refraction units, even if it's not a pair, stuff like that to like complement your board just to make it stronger. You could level to 2 as early as like round 3 even. In that same vein, you should level to 3 by round 5 or 6, but it can be later depending on if you keep hitting your pairs. You should roll a bit on level 3 rather than going straight to level 4. You should just be strong for reasons we'll talk about when we get to the mid game. But yeah, you get a lot of high quality units. This is a chance for you to start prepping, get those Savages ready, get those Folnics ready. You should consider the comp that you're angling before you're deciding if you're like rolling a lot on 2 or rolling a lot on 3. Like, change your level up timers depending on that. Because like if you're playing Sargon, you should probably get some copies of Papyrus and Heavy Rain. Philae is possible in the upgrade shop that you get once you elite an operator. So level 2 is just a generally decent timing to roll for your Sargon early game to get strong enough to get to your mid to late game in order to find Passenger and everything. But in that same vein, consider Yarag. These are, your key units are all tier 4 and tier 3. You get almost no value if you're rolling on level 2. So you should level to 3 and then send it to become strong while also trying to dig for these specific core units. Depending on your comp, you may be rolling on different timers. Alright, next we'll talk about the mid game. That's round 7 through 10, and that's specifically shop level 4, no other shop level. As you may or may not know, the max amount of life you can lose is 10. So even if you had a fairly weak early game, as long as you have 11 HP, you're able to do what I'm going to say, which is you should sack 1 round to level from 3 to 4. Just because tier 4 has a lot of high value units, and those tier 5 free shops you get for eliting are disgusting, are always high value. Now you want to sack this round anytime between round 7 and 9 to stay on tempo, and this will change depending on how hard you had to roll in your early game in order to have something usable. The issue is if you don't have a good early board, 1, you'll have bled too much HP, but also it'll take too much time for you to build a good stable board, and you'll be forever stuck on shop level 4 with no way of reaching the higher tier units because you have to spend so much time stabilizing. So it's generally better to just tempo out. If you manage to prep, like I said, this is like one of the major turns that you do so, you spike really hard because you have an overabundance of gold. You're able to both level and just dig and find some really good units, and maybe you won't even lose much health at all. Maybe you're not even sacking anything. In that same vein, you should not, after leveling to 4, sack again to level to 5. You will not have enough funds to build a good board. You could high roll, you could be playing Justin Jr., you could be playing Connaught. Connaught allows you to do that, but in a normal case, in a non-high roll game, you will not be able to sack to level 5. There are just too many good units on tier 4 as well. So when I say you do not sack again, that means you are staying on level 4 and you are rolling here for like 3 rounds. You are just finding and upgrading your board as much as possible, and you're trying to elite as many operators so you can find these key 5-star units. Like, this is the latest you commit to a line, like finding the Passenger. Okay, I can play Sargon. The Executor Altar, Lyn, Silver Ash. All of these units are indicators that, yes, I am actually playing this line. Now, I would probably say that the mid game is the most high skill part of Stronghold Protocol, and that is using what's given to you in your shops, because there are more units to hit than just your main alliance. Not only are you flexing between different comps, like maybe you're leaning both Victoria and Yarag, but also you are flexing between all of these effects from these different tier 5 units. It's kind of a tall order, but you simultaneously have to set up your board to start stacking, and you have to make your board actually good and be able to win rounds. Otherwise, you're just going to bleed out and die. And you have to look at the units offered to you and figure out how you can abuse them. This is what I would say separates a good and a great player, in that they're able to snap see, oh, Saria, I'm going to abuse this interaction, where, like, for example, I'm going to Saria the Heidi, or, oh shit, I hit Suzerain. I'm going to Suzerain the Yara and farm Nevermelt Ices. I hit an early Jessica. I'm gonna play Jessica and farm 3 rounds of items. Like, there's so many good things you can do with any of these units. These choices is what makes a difference between, like, a shitter 100 stack final board versus a 300 plus stack final board. Maybe even more. A lot of these are also enablers for the Exodia comp with, like, the 100 foresight bullshit with Investor and all that. There are more units than this depending on your comp, but these are just the most obvious ones to look out for. Okay, all that's left is your late game, and that is round 11 to the boss and shop levels 5 to 6. Now, in the late game, there is no standard level timers, and how much you have to roll on level 4 determines when you level up. And because of that, if you're like low rolling, there are games you just never go to level 6, and you're just kind of there to hold the line and do as much damage as you can, and let your teammates do most of the work. What tends to happen when you send it really hard on level 4 is that eventually your board reaches critical mass, where it is destroying everything. It is just incredibly strong. Like, you found the Passenger you needed, or anything like that. You found the Executor, and you're just farming infinite stacks, and you're able to be completely stable and just, for the most part, beat every round with not that many leaks. That is when you're ready to level to 5. And if you're in that state, half the time you're able to go straight to 6. And when you're in that general stage, that's when the stacking is, like, insane. Like, finding the correct items and traits to play around the Executor, like playing 3 durable around your Executor altar so that he can just go infinite and farm insane amount of stacks. And you're really focused on capping out in this stage, because your mid game is when you're making your general core that you're playing around. So when you get to here, cap out. In your level 4 and 5 rolldowns, you have to be mindful of prepping again. There are a few more options available for you. For example, Vina Victoria stacks up Marvel if you're playing Victoria, or even without playing Victoria, if you found a Thorns, like I said here, like this Thorns, and then you find a Vina Victoria, then you're able to stack Marvel like 8 a turn, depending on what elite it is. The 50 Marvel cash out is quite substantial, because you get 10 funds and you can just have an insane turn. The normal thing of having the full mix and the Savages, like timing your insight stacking when you're about to level or roll down, just putting in an Executor to enable Foresight, and try and proc 10 or 20 foresight stacks to get those extra funds so that you have enough gold to even skip level 5 depending on how well you do there. Again, these aren't all of the choices, these are just the most obvious ones. Astronee's another one, you're just farming a bunch of funds until you're ready to sell her off. Swire, Altar, if you're playing Yan, that's another good one. But in your late game, when you're level 5 and level 6, you're focused on capping out your board. You have to balance thinking about the operator strength framework in that the tier 6 units are very high value units with high value attributes, but you cannot cut the important synergies. Like, for example, Yarag's a bad example because half the time you're not even supposed to play 6 Yarag. Like, you don't want to play 5 Victoria to play a tier 6 unit because 6 Victoria is such a massive spike. Like, in that same vein, you shouldn't splash 0 stack alliances either because of what we talked about with stack efficacy, unless you have some way to very quickly stack them. Like Precision, for example, is easy to stack if you're playing Sargon because you're playing Passenger. Even if you're starting from 0, you didn't have Precision the entire game, Passenger will be able to stack it up, and that's when it's viable to splash in the Precision. But let's say you're splashing in a Mudrock to enable both Resilient and Durable. Well, those are actually very low value if they're both stuck at 0. So that's just something to keep in mind and something to balance. I will say, a lot of the time, it's correct to play 7 out of 6 of your main alliance. Play 7 Victoria units because they all get those massive buffs. You're not really getting much value from a 0 stack Resilient. Another thing to consider is abusing the broken attributes that I mentioned here. You should continue to do so until or even during the final round against the boss. Even if your board is weaker, just because that gives you like the extra few hundred stacks to make your board ridiculous. But the most important thing is that if you can fit Agile, you must always play Silence Altar. Agile has too much value. This unit is too good. This attribute is too ridiculous. 1 fund is +1 Agile stack. You could double that up with Saria, for example. 30 Agile in 1 round. You're already spending all your gold every turn, so it's not even difficult to play. Like, if your comp does not play Agile, just play Silence plus Telopsis. And then not only do you have Agile, you also have good healing because Telopsis is just a good healer. This unit is disgusting. A lot of your highest comps are because of this. You could splash like a 20 or 30 stack Durable maybe, if you have that built up, or you could stack in 1,000,000 attack speed with Silence Altar. If you remember from IS, attack speed is the most broken stat in Arknights, I'm pretty sure. Sure, you could probably try and survive longer if you have a lot of health, but you could survive even longer if you kill everything because of the attack speed. So every single person will want her, so it'll be really hard to elite her, but you should all contest this unit if it makes sense. Another thing to remember when you're capping out is the Demacia Isomorph, in that it allows you to turn a unit into whatever trait you want. Like, I could turn this unit into a Yarag unit or a Victorian unit. You just need that accompanying item, which allows you to cut a shitter. It's like, okay, are we really playing a tier 1 courier for some reason on your final board? Not really. We're cutting that unit for a higher tier unit. It also lets you fit in lines that you couldn't otherwise. You couldn't find the 6th Victorian. You couldn't find the 6th Yarag. Maybe you can't fit the 2nd Durable. Well, then you can use the Isomorph to turn a unit into a Durable unit. It is so flexible and gives you infinite combinations on how you cap out your board. Another way to use it is just to have a really good DPS. I think all reliable is like throwing the Isomorph on Exusiae Altar. Just play some classic Arknights. Put it on Wishadel, anything like that. You could turn either of them Yan and force them to learn Mandarin. But there's also one interesting combo that I want to bring up. I ragged on Assist Operator in my how to play every single operator in Stronghold Protocol video, but I'm kind of warmed up on it. Like, generally speaking, you're still not playing it in your early to mid game, but in your late game, it's correct like half the time to play this trait. Because you're always putting Silence Altar on your board, and then as a late game healer, AF Fiala and Lumen are really good units, plus they have good attributes that stack a lot, and Demacia Isomorph exists, letting you turn them into whatever unit you want. So, like, let's say you make Lumen a Gan unit, plus the Silence, and then you add any other assist operator on top of it, and because of the Demacia, it's suddenly possible to flex it in. Like, the stats that you get from this as a splash are just actually pretty good. So this is a core that you should think about. I think one of the more common ones is, like, for example, in Yarag, Demacia plus the Nevermelt Ice on an Ascalon who's an assist operator, plus Silence because you're playing Agile in conjunction with the Gnosis, and then you just put in either one of these two to keep your operators topped up and to give you assist operator. Like, that's just generally good. That way you can cut the Herald for a higher tier Yarag unit as well. Always look at Demacia, always get it when you can for your cap out. Alright, here's another quiz for you. Take a look at this board state here. You have 6 Victoria active, you have Saria, and you have Telopsis to enable Agile and to double proc Heidi. And you have a Golden Glow and Vina Victoria and Silence Altar on your bench. How do you cap this out? You can pause and then I'll say the answer in the count of 3, 3, 2, 1. Ignore my shittily edited picture, but this is my solution. I'd replace Herald with Golden Glow, Bagpipe with Vina, Victoria, and Telopsis with Silence Altar. Reason being, we don't really need Herald. Silence Altar will be able to perform a decent amount of the healing, so with Heidi, so will Saria. We can find a better healer later on as well, so it's fine to just cut the Herald. I'd rather have the actually valuable unit in Golden Glow. Vina Victoria is a strict upgrade from Bagpipe. They basically perform the same role, but Vina Victoria does it better and with true damage. And then, so here, if you look, I'm using Telopsis to proc Jessica, so I'm like farming 2 items around. Well, if you look around, I have too many items already. I'm out of item slots almost. So it's completely fine to just stop that synergy and just play the Silence Altar so I could start stacking Agile very quickly. But for now, this is probably the strongest board that you have. And then another question for you is, how would I cap this even further? The answer, I would say, would be this. If you get a Demosity cluster, you do get infinite Victorian hammers. So I would turn Lumen into a Victoria or a different assist operator. Like, I would probably turn Lumen into a Victorian unit and re-enable Aid after we removed it, after taking away Telopsis. It would entirely depend on what your last assist operator is, like if it's like Ascalon or whatever. Like, whether it's bulky or not changes the answer. But you do replace Saria with an assist operator in order to activate the assist operator because you're playing Silence Altar anyways. But yeah, that's just like one way to cap it. I'm sure there are more. Let me know in the comments below if you think I have a better cap out for either one of these, but for this especially up top. Maybe there's a better answer than what I came up with. But yeah, that's probably how I'd go about it. But yeah, look at the pinned comment below for some more information about this guide. And make sure you like and subscribe. Peace out.